Hello, everybody. Today I'm thinking of talking about how priorly I moved away from multi-level aggregates and started using Druid effectively. And my hypothesis is that if you do move away from multi-level aggregates, you'll actually get speed ups in your reporting system. So a little bit about me. I'm currently working at a company called Aggregates. I'm based here locally in Texas, so welcome. I've had a few years in the data space. I've worked at these companies, PayPal being like the biggest, probably well-known one out of them all. And I like to scuba dive, and if you ever want to talk about diving or kung fu or whatever, hit me up. And most importantly, I really like Druid, so that's why I'm here. Okay, so let's dive in. So just kind of giving a little brief overview of my terminology. So what are multi-level aggregates? So the idea of multi-level aggregates is that you have multiple kind of layers of the data, right? So you might have data at, say, an hour level, but it might not be fast enough for you for like feeding like a dashboard or something. So you then re-aggregate it at another level, say daily, monthly, quarterly, yearly, yada, 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 yada. So basically roll-ups, that's what I'm talking about. So, so how are they used? Mainly we do this kind of for speed, right? Back in the days, you got your SQL database. You want to run quarterly reports. So therefore, you don't want to have to, like, on the fly, aggregate on your SQL database up to the quarterly because it could take hours. But your boss is like, hey, I need it now kind of situation. So you have kind of a process that kind of rolls it up to a quarterly level. So when you access it, it's kind of just more within seconds kind of situation, right? So how we used it before was we also used it to feed the user interface. So we had a dashboard, and the dashboard would give quarterly numbers. And so we had quarterly kind of data for that. So anyway. So how are kind of, I kind of explained this a little bit, but how do multi-level aggregates kind of speed up reporting? Well, you're basically condensing the data set into a smaller data set, right? So instead of having it at the raw levels, now you're having it at the hour level, the daily level, the quarter level, the yearly level, so it's less data to kind of pull out to feed into whatever system that you need. What's beautiful is that if you know ahead of time what the reporting is going to look like, you can do all these pre-calculations and kind of get rid of any kind of complex queries on the fly, right? So you don't have to run these complex queries on the fly. You've already kind of pre-calculated and put in your roll-up tables, right? So kind of the beauty of having multi-level aggregates. Yeah. So what's the trade-off? One of the big trade-offs of data is data duplication, right? So you're already processing raw logs or whatever, so you already have the data at the raw level that you may want to keep anyway, right? Because you have your data scientists wanting to do some data discovery or whatnot, right? But in order to kind of get the speed up, get your reports done on time, you're kind of creating a copy, right? So you're creating a copy at the daily level, quarterly level, yearly level, whatever that feeds your need, right? So you have these extra copies, right? What's also difficult is that, say, requirements for these reports are not always static, right? So maybe you want to add another calculated field. Guess what? You got to go and rejigger your pipeline to add that calculated field, recompute it across all of your aggregates, and that just is more data duplication. Again, retrieval of data is going to be based on the set pattern that you use to create those aggregates, right? So one of the problems that we had was, sure, we have these quarterly data, and we want to kind of build reports for customers that are in a different time zone. Well, then you run into a problem. Do I build aggregates for quarter for each time zone? That's even more data duplication, right? What if you're supporting Eastern Pacific time zone, and then you start all of a sudden get like an Asian time zone, right? To rebuild that pipeline, right? So it's kind of more difficult, right? So one of the big things that we ran into was, well, you're building these aggregates, you have to have a pipeline to build them, right? So every new kind of aggregate you have, guess what? It's a new pipeline. Every new field you need to compute, need to add to the aggregate, guess what? You got to change all those pipelines, right? And what's wrong with this? The other thing that's wrong with these pipelines is that, so if you have a multi-tiered kind of aggregate level where you have like daily, monthly, yearly, quarterly, guess what? If you have customers that are also querying those aggregates on the fly, they're going to get those discrepancies, right? Because in your pipeline, you can't guarantee, you might finish the daily before you finish the monthly, and they might be looking at the monthly reports and they're looking at like 30 days of daily report and they're, hey, they're off. They're off because there's going to be a window of time where it's processing the aggregate and the data's not going to match, right? So we ran into that problem a lot of times. With all these pipelines, you're going to run into the cost of maintaining the pipelines, the resources to run those pipelines, and then developer management of the pipelines. So it's kind of just, Okay, so how do we solve this problem? Druid. So, all right, let me skip this. Okay, so we kind of, basically wanted to have our cake and eat it too. So how we did that was we were looking at a way to kind of make it the developer's life a little bit easier, right? And so when we were looking at Druid, we saw that it had this super fast performance, right? And I'll get into it a little bit later in the slides. As we were researching it, we also saw that it was pretty much easy to scale, right? So I think what they suggest is, if you can, get the beefiest servers you can initially, but then you can keep on adding and it will scale. And then what I really, really enjoyed about Druid was the community. I was talking to Elena about this, but the Slack group is amazing. I've never had an open source community where I can ask a question in the Slack group and I get a response within 10 hours or less. Actually, I think the first time I went there, I asked the question, I got a response in less than an hour, which to me, I'm like, it's unheard of. So, yeah. And then we'll get into the benefits that it provides that multi-level aggregates doesn't have. So, let's see. So, one of the main benefits that I got from Druid was I no longer have to compute these aggregates, actually. I only needed to roll up the data to the lowest level of granularity I needed. And for my use case for reporting, it was to the hour level. So I rolled up all my data to hour level, and I just kept hour level data. So what this also allowed me to do, because Druid was very fast, was I no longer had to pre-compute calculations at all, right? So everything is no longer pre-computed. So everything I'm doing is I'm storing it at almost the raw level, non-pre-computed. What does this mean? I also simplify my pipelines. So I only have one pipeline. The pipeline goes from my data lake directly into Druid rollup at the hour level. So by decreasing the pipeline, I no longer have 10, 20 Hadoop jobs running to compute these aggregates. I only have one. Right? So I no longer have to fight with other teams for Hadoop resources. You can kind of expand this to other kind of big data kind of jobs as well, but in my experience, we were using Hadoop, and so we were always in a constant fight of that team kind of hosed their cluster, we can't get our jobs to run kind of situation. So we didn't have that. We just were like, hey, this is our slot. We're only going to run it once. Don't worry. And yeah. Okay, so here's kind of one of the big wins that we got. So since we're keeping data at the hour level and we're no longer pre-computing aggregates, we're pre-computing calculations. We're doing everything on the fly. So how does that benefit us? You have a change, you want a new calculation? Just call us. Just tell us what the formula for that calculation is. I don't need to know ahead of time. I don't need to change any pipeline. I don't need to be like, hey, you have a different formula for reach? Sure, just tell me now. I will give to you in the report on the fly. There's no additional dev cost associated with me to kind of pre-compute it and put it in a pipeline, right? I just say, hey, Druid, sum up this. The calculations for this is now this plus this, instead of me saying, hey, my pipeline, I need to create another column that's called, reach 2, and reach 2 is some of this, and later down the line, like a year from now, Your product manager is like, oh, I made a mistake. The calculation is not actually that plus that, it's this plus this square that. Now it's just like, hey, UI folks, just call my reporting system with a new updated calculation, so you don't need to kind of reach me at all anymore, right? So, before I get to that, there's one other thing I kind of want to talk about. So, one of, I'd say, the key kind of differentiator of Druid is sketches. So, in ad tech, when I was working at Mobi, we had this concept of reach where we're trying to find the number of distinct users over a set period of time. It's a very expensive operation, right? What Druid offers is it offers this concept of data sketches. So you can kind of think of it as a way to kind of get an estimate for distinct users. I mean, there are other use cases for sketches outside of this, but this was kind of my use case, right? So what you can kind of do is kind of say, Druid, hey, by the way, I will have this use case where I'm going to have to get a distinct count of users, and Druid will actually use data sketches to kind of do some magic. I mean, there's formulas on it, but basically what it boils down is instead of a table scan, it kind of becomes an additive aggregation. So we kind of leverage that a lot for reach calculations. So I would say that's also one of the main kind of selling points of Druid. So anyway, with all those main selling points, what does that mean? So development time decreased, right? I don't need to maintain 5, 6, 10 pipelines. I need to maintain one. Pipelines are simple. New developer comes on board, just be like, hey, look, you don't have to kind of know that, hey, this pipeline here feeds into the monthly aggregates, this one feeds into yearly aggregates. You can make a change, you need to kind of go inside. No, I just have one that just draws it into the hourly level. Done. Simple. Easy to understand. Quicker time to market. Product manager changes the calculation, just call it with a new calculation. No computation needed. You don't even have to reach my team. Done. And then I guess we talked about it already, but decreased resource utilization means saving money. So, all right. So I'm going to give a high-level architecture of kind of how you could use it, and this was very similar to how we kind of did it on our side. So usually you would have a data lake, and from that data lake, you probably want to aggregate into some kind of level for your reporting system, right? So for our use case, we aggregated at an hour level because we had use cases for different time zone, different customers on different time zone to have different time zone based reporting. We would use a workflow orchestration tool, Airflow, Conductor, Pick Your Poison, to kind of basically take the format of the data lake and kind of partition it to the way that we want, right? And then further up, submit the JSON spec into Druid for Druid to ingest, right? And here's where we would say, hey, by the way, Druid, we probably want to kind of create a data sketch on said column, so on and so forth, right? Druid then would ingest it, and then we would have some kind of wall guard on top of Druid because, being a person that houses the reporting system, I don't want them to host the reporting system. So it'd probably be a good idea to have some kind of data serving application to kind of just wall guard out and kind of validate the requests, make sure they don't do any crazy windows that you don't want. I think one of the things was we didn't want to have a crazy lifetime kind of situation. Now, what's great with Druid is that you can actually set the lifetime of the data. You can just go in and be like, hey, for this table, or I think they don't call it table, this data source, I only want to keep 2 years worth of data, 1 year worth of data, et cetera, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I think I dove into each specifically. So yeah, workflow orchestration, that's your Apache Hive, Airflow, sorry. Netflix Conductor, if you want to use that one. Yep, so like I said, workflow orchestration, schedule your jobs. You can trigger, so we had a situation where we triggered, so when we got emit logs, we had it automatically trigger ingestion into our Druid pipeline. We also did a lot of data cleaning in this step. So our data lake was in Parquet, used with a Hyperdisk store on top of it. We would basically kind of take the raw logs that we needed. We would then partition it into hours, which is kind of the way that we wanted it. And then we would just roll it in using kind of orchestration tool. Yeah, sorry. Okay. So Druid, you submit your JSON spec. You can say, hey, this function needs this aggregation. What's also great is actually you can actually specify if you wanted to. You can say, hey, this column is some combination of set columns if you wanted to kind of create a new column. And you can do that in Druid. It allows for some kind of transformation as you're ingesting data into Druid, which is kind of cool. If you haven't used Druid before, there's a nice console kind of run the queries. You can also use to ingest the data, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, let me go back. There we go. So what did we use the data serving application for? So with our use cases, we had two kind of use cases. We had to feed the dashboard and we had to run offline reports, right? So the way that we were experiencing Druid was that you would have a set of brokers, and basically which broker you hit was basically where the queries run. So the concept is like you have your historical servers, which has the data residing there. And so the data gets aggregated on the historical server and then passed into the brokers, and that's where it kind of munges together and you retrieve it. So we had, 10-ish brokers. So what we ended up doing is we had to kind of silo some brokers for our UI use cases versus kind of our offline reporting. Because for offline reporting, it takes an hour, 2 hours, it doesn't really matter. It eventually gets there. But for UI use cases, we need like 1-2 second kind of response time, right? So we kind of use our data serving application to kind of do the load balancing. We ran into problems trying to use HA proxy and ended up being slower. So we had to kind of put our serving application on top of it. Again, we used it for validating requests into systems, and then for access control, right? So I believe the console does not have access control, at least not at the time when we were using it. So we kind of mandated that any access into Druid came through our data serving application, since we can kind of put access control on top of it. Though that might have changed since we've last used it. So anyway, thank you guys for your time.